Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and I'm joined today by Matt Ford and Stefan Biankowski. Stefan, before we go to Matt, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm remote recording here. I'm at my parents' house in Glasgow, and I can, to the surprise of no one who's ever visited my hometown, it's sunny everywhere in the country, but I'm looking at the window right now here and it's raining.
Beauty.
But I won't let it get my spirits down because it is sunny elsewhere and the Champions League is just around the corner. So, yeah, I'm doing well. How are you, Manu?
I'm good. It's sunny.
It was sunny where I live, and then I drove 40 minutes southwest, and now it's raining. So, yeah.
No wonder they beat each other up every time they play one another. Makes sense to me now. It always rains.
Yeah, it's a damp city. I'll put it that way. It's got a lot going for it, but it's always damp. That's for sure.
All right. Well, we also have Matt here, who I think is at a bazaar in Köln. At least it sounds like from his background noise, which you will hear now.
You're going to have to translate that into English, by the way, because I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's a market. It's a fancy word for a market.
A transfer market. As you were saying, Manu, the whole city is a bazaar, some might say. But it's very sunny bazaar. It's been wonderful weather here in Cologne and in the region all weekend, which is why I didn't actually go to any games this weekend. I was actually enjoying the weather. It's just south of Cologne and south of Bonn, on the River Aar, which is famous for a really bad flood a few years ago, a catastrophic flooding. But on a brighter note, famous for fantastic wine. And there was these so-called like wine walking trails, and a friend of mine decided to celebrate her birthday on the wine walking trails, which essentially involves walking around the hills from vineyard to vineyard and trying everyone's wine. So you can imagine how everyone ends up come 5 or 6 p.m.
Yeah,
but this is why there was no bulletin from Matt.
Yeah. My wife went on a wine hiking trip in Scotland last summer, and I thought it sounded like the worst thing in the world, because the last thing I want to do when I'm drinking is start hiking up hills. But I'm sure you had a great time, Matt.
No, Stefan, that is exactly what it is. And admittedly, it's not entirely my cup of tea or glass of wine either. Someone had that great idea for a podcast, didn't they? That we should do like German beers combined with football culture, which, I'm your man for that. I'm not quite your man for walking around the hills drinking wine, although I gave it my best shot. You'd be pleased to know. Get me on beer. That's more my forte. But yeah, I have caught up as much as I could. It meant that I couldn't get to Köln against Leverkusen, which would have been my go-to. It was too sunny for a derby anyway, wasn't it? To be honest, football belongs in the rain.
Köln certainly thought so, but we'll get to Köln in a moment.
I think that's literally the definition of a fair weather fan, by the way.
Yeah, he's a fair weather Köln fan. Kölner love. He knew that
the jury's still out.
He knew they were going to lose the derby, so he didn't go. Yeah, it was Becky's 40th birthday, so I did a lot of catching up on Sunday evening with the games. So I'm very much in the same boat. There was celebrations Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning with kids in the house as well. So it was crazy. But here we are. We're gonna get to Köln. Don't worry. But I want to start with Leipzig Union Berlin, the Friday game. Leipzig win that game comfortably, and are now very much on course of returning to the Champions League. In fact, they can secure that spot as early as next week if results go the right way. Union Berlin, though, 32 points. They're 6 points off the relegation playoff drop zone. Technically speaking, I mean, they can secure staying in the league next week too. And Dan left us an interesting note, Stefan, that I'm going to read you. He was at the game, but unfortunately can't make the podcast. He says that maybe Union need to be a bit more worried. that was the impression that he got from the mixed zone, that everyone was kind of like, well, it will be okay. And yeah, you look at the table, it probably will be, but you probably also need to make sure that you at least win one more game.
Yeah, I obviously took this game in on the Friday. It was on, I think it was on YouTube actually here in the UK. I certainly watched it back on the YouTube channel, which is always great, by the way, to be able to do that. It's on live. And I'll be honest, it felt to me like a very, very naive Union Berlin performance. I know like you said, we had hoped to have Dan on the show, but travel plans have just kind of got in the way, and all four of us have actually kind of struggled to make time this week, which is why the show might be a little bit shorter, and why Matt's literally filming it before he heads off to the pub in as you say, a market in Cologne.
From a doner shop.
Yeah, and I'm sitting in the front room of my mum and dad's house. But I certainly think it was a game where, well, Dan basically said that, without say, in as many words, Union basically said, well, look, Leipzig are Leipzig. They're a very good team. They've got very great individual players. What do you want us to do, or what were we supposed to do? And I do kind of wonder if, and I feel like that's such a kind of damaging comment or ethos to have at this point in the season when you consider where Union are on the season, in the table, sorry. And yes, Leipzig are definitely informed. They've kind of picked up. They're ending the season very strongly, and will look like probably now get Champions League football, which does kind of flip the whole kind of narrative around Werner, at Leipzig. But from the very start of that game, it felt like they just had no interest in competing with Leipzig. Even before the goal, which itself, the first goal was, just a tremendous kind of, if you're playing football and the way the ball drops and then the volley goes in, you're like, oh, right, okay, there's not much you can do about that. But like 9 minutes into the game, Leipzig were like 4-on-2 in counterattacks against Union Berlin. It's often a kind of bugbear of mine with Bundesliga matches where the lesser team often just kind of naively plays this kind of B or C list style of counter-attacking football, and it means they get ripped apart by the better team. And I think this is a perfect example of it, where Union just looked extremely naive. They tried to play toe-to-toe with Leipzig, and then obviously didn't have the players for it. And, I can understand if Union are saying, well, in the grand scheme of things, staying up or going down isn't really going to rely on picking up points against Leipzig, but the manner in which Union's season has kind of fallen apart, the manner in which they have started stumbling down the table, and the manner in which they've brought in a new head coach who has very unfairly had to deal with the kind of criticism that a male in her role wouldn't have to deal with.
Yeah,
you really would have probably been hoping for a bit more fight from Union Berlin in this game, and it just didn't happen. And I guess you could maybe argue that maybe they think there's worse teams than us in the league table, who I'm sure we'll come on to talk about in today's show. And they might say, we've got, FC Köln, Mainz and Augsburg coming up, and those are the games we'd be hoping to pick up points in. But I don't know, if I was a Union Berlin fan, I would have been really upset. And it kind of, it made me think of, how certain ultra groups simply refuse to go to Leipzig when their teams are playing there. And it felt like Union Berlin's first team gave a perfect example of that by doing, by copying them and not showing up at all.
The players boycotted it as well, just like all the fan groups do. I've been doing some thinking about this and trying to find the best way to package this up in thoughts without sounding like this is Marie-Louise Itter's fault. When you make a coaching change, right? You using that sort of as a way to get jump a team into action, right? Because at the end of the day, when the club is forced to change the coaches, that is also a way to show the players that they have really messed up. And then you want to do more. You want the dressing room to sort of jump into action and say, get shouldered awake. Like, look, like this is a serious situation, and we have to be on high alert now. We're not completely clean, cut and dry out of this mess yet. And firing Baumgart, when they did fire Baumgart, at a time too, just months after they renewed his contract. That should have the leadership, the players who are in leadership roles at this club sit up and, at least say something. But the results have gotten worse. The performances have been meh. It's Union Berlin. They're a good team, but when you compare it to the way Union Berlin played at home against Bayern Munich early in the season, right, where they got a point and probably had deserved all three. It's and then you get Dan's impression from the Knicks zone where it's like, well, it's gonna be okay. Yeah, we don't really have to worry so much. They're probably right, but Matt, if I read all of this and I'm a fan of the club, I'd be like, hey, wake up. Like, you already fired the coach. Your results under the new coach, no matter who he or she is, have been terrible. Show some resistance, show some fight, because I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, you definitely get the sense that they're relying on those home games. The fixture list, as Stefan was saying, does fall slightly favourably in their favour. They got home games against FC Köln and Augsburg, plus Mainz away. Although we saw what sort of damage Mainz can do to teams, at least in one half of a game this weekend. Nevertheless, I'm always right when it comes to those fixtures between Union Berlin and RB Leipzig. I'm always reminded of that meme with like the big scary dog and then the little cute dog. Depending on whether they're playing at home or away. Union have got a really, really good record against RB Leipzig at the First Rhine. But yeah, it's the complete opposite when they go when they go away. And that was from what I could see some highlights and reading around the game, very much the case on Saturday, no, on Friday, sorry. Whether it was naive, as Stefan said, maybe, because I don't think the performance against Wolfsburg last week in Marie-Louise Etter's first game was that bad, but they created a lot more chances and they probably let down by the finishing ultimately. But it was certainly much more expansive, aggressive, offensive than the performances had been up until that point under Stefan Baumgart, where you can level an element of naivety at the head coach will be approaching the game in Leipzig in the same way. Perhaps maybe you do need to put aside some of your more attacking philosophy and be more realistic, unless it genuinely is the case that they were looking at that game as a bit of a bonus, a potential bonus 3 points, which, as we were also saying, if you're an Union Berlin fan, is not necessarily what you want to hear, because they have very much slipped into it down the bottom there. They have a few things in common with FC Köln in that sense, which might get onto in a bit when we talk about them. Not just in what we've slipped into a relegation battle, but also they've also replaced the head coach in a very, very similar way. Remy Wagner at FC is also, I think he's only 1 year older than Marie-Louise Etter, also comes from Dresden and has also been promoted from within the club to take over interim charge until the end of the season. He's also had a similar effect. I think his first couple of games in charge, we saw FC Köln being a bit more offensive. Said Maler is a guaranteed starter in the same way that Marie-Louise Etter is starting Illich and Burke up front and trying to be a lot more aggressive and attacking and on the front foot. But I think there is an argument to say that was a bit of a naive approach going away to an RB team, which is really looking at pretty much cementing. And have they cemented Champions League football now or not? Or a couple of points still to go, but it's looking pretty good.
It's not a done thing yet, but very close.
Not a completely done deal yet, but certainly Champions League chasing, and they've had a certain massive turnover for them in recent weeks. Very much reliant on Union Berlin's home form. I think it will be enough ultimately, because the other thing they have in common with Köln and some others down there is that St Pauli are keeping them on alive by being even worse. So I think it will be enough, but it's probably not the sort of serene and confident end to the season which they would have hoped for by changing the coach.
So, Matt, you give me a bridge here to two different games. So I don't want to transition because you already mentioned the new Köln coach and you also mentioned St Pauli. So I'm going to go to Köln here first because they could have done a big step forward. Stefan, you wrote about them in your newsletter. Well, not newsletter, as part of the Monday Bulletin. Not the newsletter. Yeah, he's first gives you the big handshake and then he gives you the big nod. But, the joke is always Köln against Leverkusen is not a derby unless Köln win. And other than if Leverkusen win, it's just a game on the fixture list. I think that's definitely no longer true. It's a good joke, but it's no longer true. Leverkusen, I thought it was really telling under how much pressure Kasper Hjulmand was in this game by the way he celebrated both the Patrick Schick goals. And they looked really good for their money. And even when Waldschmidt scored, okay, I didn't really get the sense that they could get back into this match and get the point. But yeah, Köln, you had some thoughts on them, so I'm gonna hand it over to you.
No, I was actually shaking my head because I think you'd gotten St Pauli and FC Köln mixed up because I wrote my newsletter about St Pauli, so I thought you were going to come to me and say, you wrote your newsletter last week. Yeah,
I get the newsletter as well, but that is later in the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, so for anyone who obviously hasn't listened or read the Monday Bulletin, how dare you? But also, you can sign up for free on the Gegenpresse website, or Substack, sorry, and get our thoughts on that. And I kind of poked fun at FC Köln, kind of referencing a line from Pirates of the Caribbean, saying,
which is also technically a more St Pauli reference as well, really, just to add to the confusion that you've gone for the Pirate metaphor.
Only Depp is definitely more of a Köln character than a St Pauli character, but that's just me.
Actually, in the metaphor similarly that I was using, in that FC Köln were the Elizabeth Swann character from Pirates of the Caribbean who doesn't know she's dealing with pirates, or in specifically dealing with pirates that turn into skeletons at night. And I was basically saying that FC Köln don't really realise they're in a derby when they play Leverkusen, and that's exactly why they always tend to lose this fixture. But hey, look, I mean, as far as I could tell, I didn't get a chance to watch this game live, but it seemed to be like a very kind of tightly contested match until obviously the penalty. FC Köln missed an open goal, admittedly from a tight angle, that hit off the post, and then Patrick Schick scored from the penalty spot. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Manu. It's a fixture that kind of baffles me because, as you say, it's a game. We can joke that FC Köln don't really take it seriously. No more seriously than any other game, but certainly not seriously as maybe games against Gladbach or maybe Fortuna Düsseldorf if you want. And a really fascinating one in the sense there was a game that maybe they really should have looked to try and win at home against Leverkusen, only for a Leverkusen team who have been far from comprehensive or far from impressive at all, really. And they failed in that regard. I thought Patrick Schick did look back to his old self. I thought his second goal was definitely worth watching. Very kind of deft finish. And although I don't really have any stats to hand on this, it does kind of feel like Leverkusen would be in quite a lot of trouble if not for Patrick Schick's goals this season. I know it's an easy thing to say when you've got a striker up front, but it feels like whenever I do check in on Leverkusen, it does seem as though they are kind of hanging by a thread, and that thread is the goal-scoring form of Patrick Schick. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we could do a whole episode on where Leverkusen are right now, but I think we've done something on them recently, and maybe not much more to add to that. But yeah, another game, maybe much like the one we just talked about, where admittedly, I think maybe Köln probably played a lot better in this game against Leverkusen than the kind of harsh tones I was using against Union, and maybe what we'll go on to say about St Pauli. But nonetheless, Manu, a result that probably will sting and doesn't help their fans sleep at night.
No, I mean, this entire relegation battle baffles me in so many ways because I look at this table and there's a significant gap between 15th and 16th, and you can say 15th and 14th because Köln and HSV are on the same amount of points, 31, and then there's St Pauli with 26, right? It's almost like they're all sleepwalking to rescue. And you just hope that none of these teams that are sleepwalking, whether it's Union, Köln or HSV, are going to stumble on the way back to bed. Because the only, there's a couple teams that have kind of really risen up. Werder comes to mind, who have made a huge step now, right, to safety. Gladbach too, I think that point against Wolfsburg was very valuable. But yeah, Köln are 5 points after with 3 games to go. That feels safe, man. It gives you that illusion of safety almost, doesn't it? And you are at, I think you're at a Döner shop. Can't quite 100% tell. But what's the mood like at Köln's Döner shops?
Can we just take a minute to appreciate if Matt gets better Wi-Fi in a Döner shop in Cologne than poor Dan does in Berlin, then we're in real trouble here.
Confirm that I'm absolutely not in a Derby kebab shop. I'm in a nice little cafe near Cologne South. I am Cologne Süd. So yeah, I managed to find a place to sit down for a while. So I'm glad the Wi-Fi's holding up. Very much so. Very much so. No, it seems to be holding up so far. So fingers crossed. I think the mood's just about okay for a while. The word sleepwalking that you mentioned, I think you're definitely right. That was the case for a while and led to the led to the dismissal of Ludwig Kwasniok. I do think Cologne have woken up, and I think generally speaking, the way Stefan was talking about watching those derbies or not taking them seriously, or dropping points or not turning up as a team when the occasion demands it. That's often the case, but I don't think it was the case or something you can accuse Cologne of on Saturday. I thought, at least from what I've seen, it seems to be very much the better team for large parts, created substantially more chances than Bayer Leverkusen. Were let down by the finishing once again. I thought, and I think I've said this about Saïd El-Mala before, it was sort of a typical performance of his, in many ways one of his best performances, right in the opening 2 or 3 minutes. He's won the ball high up, with really good aggressive high pressing and launched a Cologne attack. And that continued throughout the game. So he was very, very present and dangerous in that sense, but his finishing and his final ball let him down. There was one moment I think in the second half where he opts to shoot himself, where he's got at least one player to the right who he can lay it off to. And there's a couple of, I can't remember who exactly it was, but a couple of teammates are sort of waving their arms in sort of slight frustration that he hasn't looked up and played and showed a bit more awareness in that situation. But then again, he's only a kid. And then, of course, as Stefan mentioned, or was it Newman who kind of, he's missed that open goal.
Yeah.
Very, very tight angle, yes. I can't help but think that, nevertheless, I think that has to go in. Saïd El-Mala is an extremely good footballer. He's a Bundesliga professional. And no matter how tight that angle is, I think it has to go in. There was another goal over the weekend. I was watching it earlier, and this is really bad because it's completely, I mean, God knows exactly who it was, but there was another finish. Was it a goal that was ruled out for offside in another game this weekend, which was finished from a tight angle, and whoever it was put it away? You have to forgive me because I've forgotten who it was, but I'm sure there was a similar incident this match day, which made me think that, if that's the comparison, then Saïd El-Mala had to be putting those away. I thought generally speaking that I thought Cologne probably were on balance the better team, but didn't take the chances, and you get punished for that. In particularly when you see the second goal that you mentioned there, Schick. Obviously, it's a really, really good counter attack. It's really well worked. It's a good finish, but it's come literally a matter of seconds after Kaminski has missed another big chance for Cologne at the other end. So they've only got themselves to blame, because I think, it's similar to as we've seen in previous games, they have been aggressive, proactive on the front foot, but as so often don't take those chances, and that's been a massive problem for them. Again, similar to Union and Hausfall, they're being kept very much alive in this relegation battle by the fact that St Pauli can't seem to buy a point. But I really don't think Cologne were that bad. Leverkusen probably were there for taking. She's not in good form, and yeah, probably would have been a chance. I think they've shown in previous years that they can take those games seriously. Over the cup quarter final or whatever it was last season, away to Leverkusen as a second division team, when you took them to extra time, so they do take these games seriously, despite the whole debate about derby, not a derby. That's sort of like a fan-culture debate you can have. But I certainly wouldn't accuse Cologne on Saturday of taking that game in any way lightly, in the way that you might perhaps accuse Union Berlin of having been a bit naive and relaxed in the game in Leipzig. I wouldn't accuse Cologne of that, but still puts them in a situation of needing points. And if anything, Cologne have arguably got one less game than the others, given that they've got Bayern away on the final day.
Yeah, but that's one game more. Do you think Bayern Munich are going?
Depends how you all look at it, doesn't it? I mean, based on the first half of Mainz Bayern, you would think, yeah, it's Cologne have got a game more, 3 points guaranteed. But based on the second half in Mainz, you'd think Cologne have not got a chance.
It all depends on what happens. It all depends what happens in the next 2 weeks in the Champions League.
Yeah, I think. But I want can we really see Cologne, even if it's a Bayern Munich title party final day? Can we really see Cologne winning in Munich?
No.
I'm not sure.
More importantly, they play Union Berlin next.
Yeah, that's a huge match.
Can I just really briefly... And then Heidenheim. So they are two huge games.
Yeah. Can I really briefly touch on Almala? Because like Köln, so you're absolutely right, Matt. Their XG was 3.04 to Leverkusen's 1.33. So Köln had substantially more chances. They also had 10-3 shots on goal, like real shots on goal, right? Blaswich finished the game with the Kickernote 1.5, which is the 1.5, which is the pretty much as high of a grade as you can get. 1 is the highest. He was outstanding. But Almala's XG in this game was 1.83. So his XG alone was higher than Leverkusen's. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, but that's the thing when you rely on a 19-year-old to score the most important goals. That's just the reality.
Ragnar Acker is injured as well, so he limits an option somewhat, although they're probably doing all they can by starting Almala with Kaminsky behind him. One thing we haven't mentioned yet, and probably deserves a mention, is the penalty. Seems to have split opinions all across Germany, to be honest. Even the referee himself has changed his mind in the space of 24 hours. He gave it initially. This is a shot which has struck, I think, Eric Martel on the, what we're saying, chest, shoulder blade, arm. In the moment, he's given the penalty because he's in the moment he thinks it's an extended arm, so therefore expanding the size of his body and blocking blocking the ball that way. The VAR hasn't intervened for probably the same reason. However, 24 hours later, the referee himself and the DFB, who look after the referees, have both admitted that no, it's actually an incorrect decision. It shouldn't have been a pen, and the VAR should have intervened. As you can imagine, Thomas Kessler, FC Köln, definitely thought it wasn't a pen. The really intriguing part of it, what I thought, is that no matter what the referee has seen in that moment, about 2 minutes later, when he's justifying his decision to the Cologne players, he actually reenacts Martel's body movement by completely exaggerating the length or the distance between Martel's arm and his body. So even his reenactment seemed completely off. I think it's a pretty unfair call. I wouldn't have given it myself.
Do you know? I was just going to go back and check the penalty that the FC Köln got in the previous match day against St Pauli. Sorry, don't know why Napoli popped into my head there. Yeah, God knows where that came from. I was quickly checking. I couldn't remember what the call was like. And of course, the Bundesliga website, being the Bundesliga website, our YouTube channel only has a 60-second highlight video of the match. So shows the penalty going in, but nothing else, but in typical fashion. I thought it was a harsh penalty for sure.
Well, it's probably the wrong call. But there were plenty of other chances for Köln to turn this game around. When you think about it, they should have probably won this game anyways. Yeah, it is a weird one. HSV also lose the game to Hoffenheim 2-1, right? Which means that the Champions League race, which is probably something we can also focus on next week, is very much alive and well as well, with Hoffenheim and Leverkusen not fully back in it, because Stuttgart dropped 2 points to Werder Bremen, who are, in the way I see it, are almost out of the relegation battle now. But yeah, HSV lose as well. So they are on 31 points, just like Köln. But Köln and HSV very much kept alive by the fact that St Pauli just can't win. And they lose to Heidenheim, who stay alive, at least mathematically. The big news this week, of course, was that Frank Schmidt gave a big interview and said that next year is probably going to be his last as a Heidenheim head coach. 20 years in charge of one club. I mean, that is extraordinary. So not the end of this season, but the end of the next season is when he thinks he might finally quit. I believe it when I see it, but I think when Heidenheim are officially relegated, we can do a little bit of a post-mortem on their season. As long as they stay alive, I think it's unfair to write them completely off.
On that note, Manu, can we actually take a moment to consider whether they won't get relegated?
Because yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Maybe they don't. Maybe they make the relegation playoffs.
If you look at the way that they played against St Pauli this weekend, they were outstanding. And we're looking at a team here that've only lost one of the last 5 games. And here's Heidenheim's last 3 games of the season, right? They obviously go to Bayern Munich next weekend, but that game is obviously in between Bayern's 2 matches against PSG. Okay, so we'll probably see, Vincent Kompany, God knows what, he'll probably wheel out, Uli Hoeneß to play up front or something. At this rate,
Oli Kahn wants to have a match here.
Yeah, exactly. So
midfield.
you just play the kids from the campus. So and considering the way the Bayern have been playing recently, I know they have kind of tended to bring on the A team in the last 10 minutes and go on and win these games. So fair enough, but never say never for Heidenheim. Then they play FC Köln, and then they play Mainz. And the way that they're playing right now, I would probably fancy them to pick up wins in those 2 games.
Mainz might be celebrating at that point.
Yeah, that's 6 points, and they're only 4 points behind St Pauli, who they obviously beat in this game, which is a huge 6-pointer. And yeah, for sure. And then, as we were discussing in the chat, depends who they obviously get in the playoff, who ends up finishing that playoff spot in this fight Bundesliga. It's a perfectly winnable tie. And as we've also said in recent years, the playoff ties typically favour the Bundesliga side anyway, the way that they're scheduled. So, I think we could be very seriously considering the possibility of some sort of great escape here for Heidenheim, which would be remarkable, considering we spent almost about 90% of the season just assuming they would get relegated, and so have they. They've been quite open with the fact that they could get relegated for sure. But yeah, to kind of flip it back onto St Pauli, as you said, St Pauli were dreadful. I wrote my newsletter on them last week, and I basically said they're going to get relegated because they've been playing so poorly recently. They actually put together a decent performance against Köln last week for the previous weekend, only for Köln to get back into it with a penalty late in the second half. And as I noted in the newsletter, though, that was the first game since mid-January that they've managed to rack up an XG higher than 2, I think it was, 2.0. And I did kind of wonder, I was like, well, maybe this is an opportunity where we might see them kind of, turn it on in style finally and start creating chances and scoring goals. But this is another drab affair. And, aside from, a kind of one-on-one for Huntonji, who kind of fluffed his lines in the first half, I think St. Pauli really struggled to create chances in this game. And it's been an issue for them all season. It's they've got a decent enough defence, they've got a decent midfield, they can pass the ball around quite well, but they keep making stupid mistakes in defence. I mean, this game's a perfect example of it, in the sense that the first goal was just someone being completely unmarked from the corner, and the second goal being a counter-attack from Heidenheim, where the ball just gets lumped up the park from the goalkeeper, and there's no one simple marking, from a counter-attack. It just allows Heidenheim to kind of break through on goal. And I don't know, I kind of stepped away from that newsletter and this game thinking, it's interesting that all the teams around St. Pauli have chose to sack their head coach and bring another head coach in to try and save their season. And St. Pauli perhaps somewhat nobly have chose to stuck with Blessing through thick and thin, or thick and thicker, it would seem. And you could certainly look at the performances and say, it hasn't really worked. He hasn't really managed to rebuild the squad. He's changed his tactics this season, and things aren't working that well. Maybe they should have brought someone else in. But as we've talked about on this podcast alone, with the two or three teams we spoke about before them, changing a head coach at this point in the season, or any point in the season, isn't a guarantee that it will work.
There's also another reason why they haven't done it. I think there is Alex Blessin, despite the way things have gone in St Pauli, is in really high demand with other Bundesliga teams and teams abroad. And so sacking him would mean that they wouldn't get a transfer fee like they did for Hutzler. So it's an economic decision almost in some ways, which I know it seems weird to think about because of the results, but I would actually argue he's getting the most out of this team. They're not better than the results, and they were without Irvine for a long part of the season. Sand was another one who was really important for him at the start of the year, who's been out with an injury, right? So, and I think that the transfers that, especially up front, weren't good enough. The only player I think that they signed who has really had a huge impact was Fujita. So Blessin, because I think he's in high demand, and they're like, oh, well, if we go down, it's not the end of the world. We'll still get a transfer fee for our head coach. I think that is sort of the thinking a little bit behind here. And then, of course, I mean, you make a good point. Like, we haven't really seen the impact from coaching changes at other clubs, right? So I don't know. That's at least my thoughts. But I mean, Matt, it is an interesting snail's race now that we have to the bottom of the table.
Yeah, I got a little bit distracted there because a fight has broken out in the street behind me and the police have turned up.
Okay, well, so someone found Stefan's newsletter or bulletin.
Yeah, there's now two police vans with flashing lights, and a police officer is talking with someone. Someone was threatening to throw a bag. Anyway,
Polizei.
Is it carnival season already in Cologne?
It's 7 p.m. on a Monday, and it's
always carnival season in Cologne.
No, I think the sudden return to form of Heidenheim is fascinating. Complete opposite of Union, HSV, Köln, St Pauli. They're playing without any fear. The weight has been completely lifted off their backs. Like Stefan was saying, they've got classic run of form together. So much so that St Pauli are now actually closer to Heidenheim in the table than they are to HSV and Köln. Namely, 5 points adrift of automatic safety, but only 4 points ahead of Heidenheim. In terms of whoever ends up in that playoff, I think things could be turned on the head a little bit if it were to be Heidenheim. It's a long way to go. Yeah, you're right to say that normally it does tend to favour that Bundesliga team just because they have by its very nature have a better squad put together on a higher budget, which tends to blow any second division or third place second division team out of the water. I think were it to be Heidenheim in this situation, I think it'd be on its head because they'd be coming into it on form. This is normally the case for second division team. They go into it on form, feeling confident. Whereas in this case, it would be Heidenheim being on good form, being a bit of a high with a team that's been playing Bundesliga football for 3 seasons now or more. Whereas if St Pauli was to end up in that playoff, I think they would struggle, particularly against an Elversberg or a Hanover. Then again, St Pauli, not that they're going to accept going down or being okay, but even the start of the season, the aim was, if we can, stay up, and if we must, by the playoff. Uwe Gertlich is on record as saying that even St Pauli being in the Bundesliga playoff to stay up is not a failure. It's something we would take because it means that we have a chance of staying up. That's how low the bar has been set. So it wouldn't be a complete disaster for them. And we said before, unlike the likes of Schalke, Stuttgart, HSV, Bremen, who have gone down in recent years, St Pauli going back down wouldn't be a financial disaster for St Pauli either. Not that they would wish it, and not that anyone would wish it on them, because they are a big enrichment for the Bundesliga. With respect, a bit more so than Heidenheim. I think it's been a good story under Frank Schmidt for a couple of years. I think St Pauli had that sort of, they had that cultural uniqueness that really gives the league something different. But yeah, very much a snail's race, apart from Heidenheim, bizarrely, they were threatening to stay up.
We were catching up, being the turtle catching up to a snail.
Just one final point, next. I know Matt has to go, but just to completely agree with Matt, I think of all the clubs, I think St Pauli are probably the best positioned to deal with relegation. I obviously speak to a lot of St Pauli fans because the company we work for, Manu, and I have been told by them that they're not terribly worried about going down because, as they say, we're not Haas-Fall, we're not Schalke, we're not Werder Bremen. If we get relegated, we'll be fine. Financially speaking, they'll be fine. And, they'll hope for the best to come back eventually. But they're not a club that live beyond their means. They're not a club that rely on the Bundesliga technically from a revenue point of view to be what they are. Which, if you obviously in stark contrast, like a Wolfsburg, for example, or even like a Mainz, maybe, who have obviously spent so much time in the Bundesliga and have players and coaches because they're in the Bundesliga. You look at that St. Pauli team and, okay, maybe, as you said, maybe Blessing is under a huge amount of interest. I'd like to maybe do a brain scan on the clubs that are interested in hiring them after this season, to be perfectly honest with you, but that's maybe a discussion for another time. But anyway, you look at that squad, you look at Blessing, you look at the club itself, and it's not as if St. Pauli are going to have this huge wage bill around their neck if they do get relegated. So it'd be sad to see them go, but I think they'd be fine.
I think the choreography in the away end from the St. Pauli fan is summed up the priorities, really. All the red flags and thinking Italian, I believe. Lots of continua, so the constant struggle. Yeah, there are other priorities in that part of Hamburg. And
sounds like me with my hay fever right now.
Yeah. Maybe before we wrap this up, my final thought is, now that I've successfully predicted Schalke going up, Matt, I'm going to say that relegation spot is going to be Elversberg or Paderborn, because I think that Hannover are trending towards second place, which, by the way, is great news for the Bundesliga because that's two massive stadiums coming back. And I actually think that if you're a Bundesliga team, you would fancy playing Elversberg or Paderborn in the playoffs. No matter which one of these teams, you would fancy that.
I think less so Elversberg, to be honest, especially because they have that 1 year experience there as well. Yeah, they've been there once before, so I think that would be a lot trickier. But yeah, while we're on that, Schalke, one win away as we speak. Fantastic comeback away at Paderborn, 2-0 down, 1-3-2. Musa Silla is the new Edin Dzeko. I think a draw will be enough, won't it, actually?
No, it doesn't matter. They're up. They're up.
But that could be, if anyone's watching, that can be confirmed Saturday night at home to Dusseldorf. I was hoping to go actually, but to be honest, it's that 8:30 kickoff in Division 2. It'll be a great atmosphere in Gelsenkirchen. I was there a couple of years ago when they've secured promotion against St Pauli, under the floodlights or with a closed roof or whatever they decide to do. Dusseldorf also in big trouble actually as well, and they'll be backing themselves to get a result against them.
It doesn't matter. No one is getting to 64 points in that promotion race other than Schalke.
Saturday nights in Gelsenkirchen.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. They're up. Schalke can celebrate. If you're a Schalke fan, you're given license by me to celebrate promotion because no team is going to top 64 points in the Zweite Bundesliga this year. So I'm calling it. On that note, guys, Matt, we're going to have to, hopefully you can stay where you are. Not that it's going to turn into, and here's another word for you, Stefan, Razzia, which is a German police term for raiding a shop.
It might be an episode of like Tatort Köln. If people know what Tatort is, it might be a crime show. Maybe it's not real. Maybe it's a film set.
I was just going to say I'm usually figuratively looking over my shoulder when we do this podcast, but this week Matt's literally looking over his shoulder.
Yeah. Well, it's literally like you can see there's the police van. Blimey, blue lights. Oh, it's actually kicking off.
And then and check in next week to see if Matt survived the pub brawl.
Yeah. Or you've got arrested by the police razzia.
Yeah, typical English football fan.
Yeah, typical. There's always trouble where they are. All right, guys. Let's call it. Until next time. Auf Wiedersehen.